Hi, Sonia. How are you doing today?
Hey Olivia, I'm good.
Welcome to the Relate Pod. You are very welcome, and thank you for allowing to have this very pertinent conversation. And it's Mental Health Awareness Month, so you know that at Relate we are having conversations on all things relate and mental health. And we see a very big connection between community and mental health. And having such conversations, we believe will hopefully inspire more people to take their mental health seriously, to do the work to care for themselves, and just to raise awareness. So excited to have this conversation with you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm really, really happy to be here, Olivia. We always have good conversations, so I'm hoping this one will be fantastic.
Yes. I know right now we're in different time zones. It's morning for you in Arizona. How is
It
Arizona
is.
today? Is it very hot
Arizona is good. I mean, I'm just looking out the window. The sun is blazing. It's been
as
really hot the
usual?
last couple of days.
We could borrow some
Yeah.
heat here in Nairobi.
Really?
Yeah, it's
What's the weather like in
raining a
Nairobi?
lot. It was raining this evening, but it's not yet that cold, that very, very cold, chilly weather. It's still a bit nice. The sun comes out. The sun was out today, but in the evening the clouds darkened. It started raining. Yeah. But yes, so glad to be doing this with you again. And I am curious, what is Sonia up to these days? Give us a bit about what you've been up to in the past and recently.
Sure. I don't even know where to start because I feel like we're going to get into more detail as we talk, but I'll give you the headlines. Currently, I am pursuing my Master of Global Management in Arizona.
Ooh.
Yay! So
Yay!
I've been here about a year. I've actually just finished my first year. So that's been amazing. It's kind of shocking how quickly a year goes by. And actually, interestingly, this time last year, if you had told me this is exactly where I would be, I don't know. It was a possibility, but it's just how quickly things change and then how quickly time moves on. But that's what I'm currently doing. Before that, I spent about 10 years in consulting, and I spent a lot of that in London, but before that, I started my career in Uganda, which is where I am born and raised to a very supporting, loving parents, one of four siblings as well. So I guess the background is that Ugandan girl, born and raised, that is really where my heart is. But I've always had a lot of curiosity and a passion for people, history, places, learning. So I have spent time, in a couple of different places. But that's Sonia, slightly in a nutshell for now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just so you know, our relationship for our listeners dates back to when we were little girls in S1 in Amagunga. So decades, almost 2 decades of friendship with Sonia. And she's being very, very humble about her achievements. Believe me, we are going to get into it. But yes, you once shared with me earlier that you describe yourself as a recovering consultant. Could you please, share a bit about that? Why would you describe yourself as a recovering consultant? And maybe just to expand that question, I would ask you, why is mental health very important for you?
Yeah. So I think what I will start by saying, I think this is important to say at this point is we're going to talk a lot about mental health today, but I'm not an expert. And I would urge anyone that is listening, if you maybe resonate with some of what I say today, or if it is, especially maybe some of the darker themes, I would really encourage you to reach out to expert help. But when you reached out, Olivia, to ask me to share a bit about my journey, I was more than willing to do so because I think it's really important, this conversation that we're having. And I'm hoping that by sharing my own experience with mental health, that I can do just my little bit to destigmatize this conversation. Sorry, bear with me. Hope you can't hear all those pings. So to destigmatize the conversation so that we are more open about, discussing mental health because it's something that so many of us are dealing with, right? I want to take away one of the major factors that prevents us from talking about it, which is shame. We
Yeah.
feel a lot of shame about talking about mental health, and that does not help at all. So I'm hoping that today, as we discuss this, I can make it a little bit more relatable. It is different for everyone because we're all such unique individuals with unique circumstances. But as I was going on this journey, it was so helpful for me personally, hearing other people talk about it honestly, hearing people talk about things that I was going through and thinking, it's not just me. It's not just me. I'm not alone. There is help. And this will not go on forever. There is light
Yeah.
at the end of the tunnel. There is
Mm.
healing, there is restoration, and you will be okay. Yeah, that's the reason why, we're here today.
Yeah, and I agree with everything you've said. And while you say you're not an expert, there is so much power in sharing our stories. So much shame will be broken off people who are going to connect with what you're going to share when they know that they are not alone and they see that, when we come out of the closet, for lack of better words, when we open up and share our experiences, there is so much power attached to them because, there's someone out there who just feels exactly what you've said, the shame and then the stigma around mental health, especially back home in Uganda, it's still something that, if someone has mental health, they need to go to church and they lay hands on them, the demons come out. And there's just all these wrong, wrong things around it that I hope conversations
Yes,
like this
yes,
will just say, no, let's be realistic. Let's talk
yeah,
openly about these things. There is help, there is healing, there are solutions, there is so much help out there. But yeah, so
yes.
I'm in total agreement with everything you've shared.
Amazing. So maybe let me also try and answer the question that you asked directly, which is why I described myself to you as a recovering consultant. So as I said, I was in consulting, and when I say consulting, I mean like the big four accounting firms, which hopefully many of us know, and I will not name names. But
Yeah.
that is where I started my career, and that is where I spent a lot of the last decade or so. And it became a huge part of my personal identity, obviously, because we spend so much time at work, right? And
Yeah.
work in many ways can provide a source of identity or meaning or whatever it is. Um, Even though throughout that time I didn't actively think of myself as a consultant, now in the aftermath I've kind of thought about it and kind of reframed and given word to some of these ideas. The point is that I spent a huge part of my career back home in Uganda, in the Middle East, in Europe, doing consulting work. And some people may have the context, but for those who don't, this is a very high pressure environment. I always say, even people who come to me, because I do a bit of mentoring, someone will come and say, oh, I'm considering joining this firm or this firm. What do you think? I never discourage them from doing it because it was, and it is, can be an amazing place to especially start your career. The opportunities that it gives you to learn, to network, to grow your business acumen is great, but it is a high pressure environment where, there's a lot of demands being made on your time. And by the end of, my formal consulting career, I was extremely exhausted, which is, I guess, in a sense, how this story begins, right?
Mm.
There is, in other words, the burnout that we're going to discuss in more detail is tied very strongly. There are layers to it, right? I don't want to oversimplify it, but a huge part of what started my mental health journey, if you want to call it that, was as a result of the sheer pressure that came from my source of employment. So that is why I describe myself as a recovering consultant.
Yeah. So, when we hear about you, I remember when I always got updates of where you were going, what you were doing, I was always in awe. I'm like, wow, she is doing the thing. She's doing the thing, Sonia. I didn't expect less. You are a brilliant woman. So that was not surprising. But I guess I was also shocked when I found out the depth of what it did to you, the exhaustion, the pressure. Could you tell us a bit about the burn? When was the moment when you realized that I'm exhausted, I'm burning
Yeah,
out? What were the signs for
yeah,
you?
yeah. Of course. For me, I think when I really began to notice, so at this point, I'm about 10 years into my career. I'm living in
Mm.
London. And for all intents and purposes, things look good. I've had a very successful career. I've now reached sort of upper middle management. I have a lot of responsibility. I was supervising teams of up to, 20 people across multiple jurisdictions. So I could have some of my team in London, some of them in India, in the Philippines. It was gratifying in terms of looking back and being able to say, I've put in all this work. And now I have I don't know, data's position that bears that out, but it was also a lot of responsibility. I'll just give a little bit of context around that as well, because as I said, this is somewhat layered, right? There is the work situation, but there's also the fact that I was living on my own in London. And the living on my own I wouldn't say was a huge or immediate or obvious problem, because I think I've always been surprisingly independent. And I say surprising because I'm the last one in my family and I'm very attached to them. But when I had the opportunity to leave home and go away, I took it. And it didn't cause me a lot of anxiety to do so. I wanted to see the world. So I'm living in London on my own. I've got family close by, close, but not as close as I'd like. And then at that point, I was given responsibility for a pretty important project. Important in terms of who the stakeholders were and the deliverables and the timelines. Consulting, everyone knows it is long hours. That wasn't new. I had been working long hours for a while, and usually we call them busy seasons. Typically they last 3 months, but sometimes it goes up to 6 months, but usually not more than that. But this was different. I had been working all the hours of the day there were weeks when I was sleeping like 4 hours a day, right? And so that should kind of give you the immediate context for what was happening. I was working a lot. And at the back of my mind, I kept saying, yes, this is high pressure, but it will end, But it wasn't ending. It wasn't ending. A project would end and then it would be you take a break, because you have to take breaks, but then you're on to the next project. And I think I began to realize that this was not usual because the rest was not working. So even when I would take a break, I would take a 2-week break. There were times when I actually even went on holiday, but the rest was not kicking in. I was always exhausted. So physically was the first indicator. Then mentally as well. I think that's probably I noticed it second, but it had probably been manifesting for a while. I was mentally exhausted and my brain was always running. It was like, even when I went to sleep, it didn't entirely switch off. At some point, I was dreaming about like spreadsheets and presentations and work assignments.
My goodness. That's next level.
So the early signs were mental and physical exhaustion. Another sign was isolation. And this one is really sneaky because I remember justifying it to myself and just saying, I'm so busy, right? So I cannot see my friends. I cannot socialize. I meant to call mommy and daddy this weekend, but maybe I'll call them next weekend. But over time, I was so isolated. All I was doing was working, and those were my priorities, working and resting. So I was fairly isolated from the people that care about me and that might have been able to help me balance things out a bit more. The fourth sort of sign was, I believe it's called, the technical term is executive function, but that went, and I'll just give you the relatable aspect of it. Executive function is what enables you to do things like make decisions, to plan, to problem solve. That slowly started degenerating. And the way that showed up in my everyday work is that my to-do list just kept getting longer and longer and longer. And obviously, when you're an experienced consultant, we get a lot of training and we get a lot of support. So I really hope that this doesn't come across as entirely sort of demonizing the entire industry, because a lot of work has been done to improve things in some ways. So there is support. You always have the option to go to someone and say, this is not manageable, right? To say no to projects, to reorganize things and reallocate things so that work is manageable. But my ability to do that began to degrade, right? So it was like I was just on autopilot. And so where previously I could have been able to stop and take note, take stock and say, this isn't working. So I need to move a few things around. It seemed like I had lost the ability to do that, right? But before we even got to that point, another really important sign is that I began to feel like I was just simply failing. It didn't matter how well I did on a project. It didn't matter that, my supervisors or superiors were, when they told me I was doing a great job, when I got a great review, when clients loved me. It's like I couldn't hear that anymore. All I could hear was this voice in my head criticizing why I hadn't done this, I hadn't done that. So you lose perspective, and it becomes sort of this negative voice kind of takes hold in your head. And then that kind of snowballs into the executive function, because when you're questioning everything that you're doing, it becomes difficult for you to fix the problems as they come up. Yeah. So those were the key
So
signs for me
you sort
that
of start feeling like nothing you're doing is good enough.
nope.
Dear.
And it doesn't
Mm.
matter what everyone around you
Everyone
is
else
seeing
is
or
saying,
saying. Yeah, the voice
for
in
you,
your
you're
head
just
says,
not.
no, you're just not good enough. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's real. And even as you are talking, it has just it's taken me back to those moments. And for me, I think that has usually showed up in motherhood, where I'm just questioning myself. What am I
Mm,
doing? I'm messing
mm,
up these kids. Like there's that terrible voice that I have to work a lot to shut down and say, no, I'm the right
yeah.
person for this. I'm doing something right, even when I can't see the results now. But I can't imagine what I'm describing pales in comparison to what you just described. Like,
Mm,
I can't even imagine.
yeah.
Wow. So maybe my question is, I know you're doing your best not to demonize, the consulting world, and we are not going to demonize it because there's a lot of good that happens in there as well. But
Mm.
do you think, reflecting back on it, was there anyone in your workplace? Did you have a friend at work or boss, a relationship at work, basically, where you felt safe enough to say that, stuff is dead, I'm struggling? Was there that space for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mentioned earlier that this conversation is layered because it's never just one thing, right?
Yeah.
I think the context that I was in the UK is important, because what that means is that I was a Black African woman in a predominantly white society. And that comes with its own pressures, and that comes with its own, I guess, rules, for lack of a better word. And I think what I will say about this particular issue is that although the support is there in theory, right, how that plays out in real terms is very different. And the context that I've just described is part of it, because there was an extent to which, like, I didn't feel like I had the option to
To
say
fail.
certain things or to say no, let's say, for
No.
example.
Yeah.
And I believe in taking accountability, because it always gets to a point where, despite what is going on around you, there's an extent to which you always have agency, right? At the
Yeah.
end of the day, if the worst comes to the worst, you can always walk away. And I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out of this conversation and maybe spills over into another is how important I think it is for especially women to have a voice and to own
Yeah.
that voice, even when there are penalties. Because the reason why I maybe didn't feel like I could get the help that I needed is that I thought that there would be a penalty. And I had seen that penalty play out for other people. So there was a degree to which I felt like my hands were tied. I do think, to be perfectly honest, that a lot more can be done to improve things in this world, but in the world of consulting. But I also have to be pragmatic. This is a dinosaur. This is a world that has been around for a long time, and it
Long
works the way
time.
it works. It can be difficult to change things from the inside. But I follow a lot of sort of senior leaders, women, female leaders in consulting, and I can see that the work is being done to actually change things, to change the word is escaping me, but to change the mindsets that persist, especially around what it means to be a woman in the workplace, what it means, for example, to be a mother who has a lot of responsibility. And you simply cannot toe the line that, work hard, play hard. That was kind of a
The
thing
motto
that we
of
used to say that
mm,
was meant to mean, yes, we work really, really hard, but when we take a break, we really enjoy ourselves. Honestly, that second bit happened maybe a couple of times a year, but there was always an emphasis that there was this goal that you were chasing, this progression that you were chasing in your career, and that took priority.
Over
So the simple
everything else.
answer is that yes, there are things, there are sort of support structures there, but we don't always feel empowered to really use
To
them
use them.
meaningfully. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is something like the layered factor of being a black woman in a
Mm.
predominantly white society, in a predominantly possibly white organization. Your voice was muted many times. You couldn't
Oh,
speak
yes.
up. You couldn't say what you really wanted to say. You were towing many lines. Will I
Mhm.
lose my job? Will I be understood? And yeah, so race always comes into play in this thing.
It does.
It really does. And then you add the layer of being a woman.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, yeah,
It's not always easy. It's difficult. It is. And I think even as you say that you mentor a couple of people who come to you, these are things that no one tells you about until
mm,
you are in the situation and you get an awakening of what you're dealing with. That it's not
yeah,
just that you're good at your job. You're also a woman. You're
yes,
also black.
yeah,
You need to consider that and everything that comes with it. Thank you,
yeah,
Sonia,
of
for
course.
highlighting that. So after you realize that, you're not functioning as you ought, what did you do? What was your response? What happened after that?
Yeah, what happened is really the right question because what did I do? Um, this is the point where I kind of feel like things spiraled. It felt like life was happening to me and I was just along for the ride. So what
Wow.
happened is that one day, after many, many months of working all the hours of the day, I woke up and I think I was probably reflecting on all the things that I needed to do that day. And I simply couldn't get out of bed. Usually I was on autopilot. Wake up, think about the day, think, okay, I have lots to do. Get up, get going. This one day, for whatever reason, I just found myself lying in bed and the clock ticking. And I usually start work at 9 and it's like maybe 8:30 and then it's 9 o'clock. And then I'm like, obviously I'm going to be late, probably not going to make it in from the way, given that I'm not doing the usual things. And I can't remember a lot of the details around this time, but I presume I must have called in sick and said, I can't come in today. And then I just lay in bed all day. And then that happened for a second day. And then, probably a third day. I can't quite remember, but I do know that it was, let's say, a week where at some point I said, you know what, I must just be really, really tired. So maybe if I just sleep this off, I'll get up next week and, things will be okay.
Take it off.
But that didn't happen. That didn't happen. And then eventually I formally requested time off and I got about 3 months. And this is one area that I really have to credit the kinds
The
of
farm.
companies that I work for. No one questioned it. I literally said, I'm not well and I need time off. And my boss signed off on it fairly quickly. Obviously, he was concerned, asked a few questions, but I got the time off.
Mm.
After that, I got a sick note. I went to the doctor, got that all formalized, and then, yeah, took 3 months off. And if you ask me, Olivia, to describe what happened in those 3 months, I'm not sure that I could tell you. Obviously, I was keeping myself alive, right? I was
You are eating
eating,
something and
I
drinking
was
and
eating
stuff.
something, I was showering, but I was just, in my house, I was probably watching a lot of maybe TV or social media
Movies.
or something, but mostly I was sleeping. Mostly I was
Mm.
sleeping. I was so exhausted. After the 3 months, I believe I probably went back in for maybe a day or two, but I could tell that I was
Not.
unable to plug back in. Yeah, and I think I
Yeah.
remember I must have got like a week to like get settled back in. I was told, take your time, do a slow transition. And then within a couple of days, I realized that I've spent a lot of time resting, but I'm not rested because this 3 months at the back of my mind has been all my responsibilities playing in the background and how the things that I'll need to pick up and run with when I get back in. So I haven't really rested in any real way. And then the pandemic kind of checks in around that time. And
Wow.
in the UK, it was so serious and so strict, like everything shut down.
Shut down.
And the family that I had living close by immediately were like, Sonia, you cannot be on your own during this time, come over.
Moving.
So I actually moved in with them for quite a few months, maybe a month and a half. And my cousin, who I'm really close to, bless him, I could tell that he could tell that I was not okay. But he's not a very, he doesn't, but he showed concern. I think tried to figure out what was happening. But for him, at least I was close by. He could keep an
By,
eye on me. And again, and so they looked after me in terms of welcoming me and giving me a place to camp out for that very confusing and difficult time. What I can tell you is that I was still doing a lot of sleeping.
sleeping.
And I think we can talk about this a little bit more because I think it is a really important part of this whole burnout experience. The fact that it doesn't matter how much you rest, you don't feel rested. And that is what kind of distinguishes it from the usual levels of exhaustion. When you're exhausted, you can take a break and you'll bounce back. But when you find that that is not happening, then that is really a clear sign that
That
something deeper is happening.
yeah.
So I took time off of work, moved in with family, and I knew that something was happening with me, but I hadn't got to the point where I was really unpacking it. It was almost like I was going through like a trauma response where
Yeah.
I just curled in on myself so that I didn't take any more shocks that would disrupt
Mm.
my life. But I hadn't yet started picking apart what was really happening. That came a little bit later. And that's another thing to take note of. Burnout, it's you're along for the ride for a while. Yeah. If
Mm.
you're very lucky, you may be able to sort of come out of it within a year. But I want to encourage people that if it has been longer than a year, um, don't be discouraged. It can take time. It did
Time.
for me. So in terms of the timeline, I would say we're about 6 months in.
You're
I've
still
taken
feeling
time off
very
of work.
exhausted.
The pandemic has happened. We're all somewhat confused. And then, I don't know, do you want me to carry on in terms of what happened after? Do you have questions
Yes,
about
go
that
for it. Go
time?
for it.
Yeah.
No, I think
So,
maybe let me interject. I was going to say
sure.
something. It's good that you brought up the pandemic because I remember getting
Mm,
a call from you during the pandemic,
hmm
and you telling me that, it was really, really tough. I was
hmm
exhausted. I think at that point, honestly, even as you were telling me, like you said, I didn't really connect with how deep this was.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the pandemic is an added layer because that was
Oh,
2020
yeah.
difficult year for everyone.
Yes.
And so I cannot even imagine on top of the world shutting down and us not knowing what's going to happen next, then you're dealing with such a burnout. Yeah, but
Yeah.
go forth. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
it.
that's actually a really key part of it because what happened with the pandemic is also that because we were all isolating, some of the things that could have happened earlier to kind of help me, I guess,
Come out of
figure it
it.
out a little bit quicker were not happening. So, like my friends being able to check on me. I had a really good friend that lived in Birmingham at that time, who I would typically see her at least once a month, and we would do something. Would do something. Sometimes we would travel. I had a really good friend from work who lived a lot closer. So I would have been seeing her probably more frequently, but because of the pandemic, that wasn't happening. So the people that were close to me were not even really getting a good sense of what was going on with it because people would call me, friends would call me, and I would try and paint the picture that all was well. I wasn't honest with them about how difficult things were for me and even the fact that I had taken time off of work. And so the pandemic is really important in this story because I didn't have those additional supports that would have told the people around me that, Sonia is actually not okay.
Yeah, because talking on the phone,
So
you can get away with so
yes,
much than when I'm
you
seeing you
can get away with
personally.
so much,
So much, yeah. Because if
so
I'm
much.
seeing you, I'll be
Yeah,
able to say, this is not, something is up. So the
something's going
isolation
on.
from
And I
pandemic
remember even,
is
yeah.
a
So
factor in this
eventually
story.
it is. So eventually, I think after our like first official hardline 6 weeks lockdown where I lived with my cousin, I think subconsciously I realized that if I stay here, these people are going to clock me. They're going to clock that, I'm not working, right? Because everyone was worried.
Yes.
I hadn't told them, okay, that maybe hasn't come out clearly. I was not being honest with
Honest with
anyone
everyone
in my
about what you
life
are dealing
about
with.
what was happening because I felt so ashamed.
Shame.
I felt so ashamed
Yeah.
about it. So I think I was putting on a ruse that I was working from
King.
home, you know, in my, because there was three of us, all of us were working. My cousin had his little spot in the house. His wife also had her little office somewhere. And then I had to work from, you know, my room. And so I could give the impression that I was
I
working. I
was
was
working,
not.
not.
Yes. And then I
Uh,
realized, you know, if I stay here, yes, Alan, I said, if I stay here much longer, Alan is definitely going to sniff me out. So I packed my bags and I went back to my house, my home in London, so that I could continue being unemployed or jobless or not working in peace. So that carried on for a while.
Sonia, first pause a bit.
Of course.
Have you taken time to understand or to dig deeper
Mm,
into why you were so ashamed? Why
yeah,
there was so much shame around you? Why couldn't you be honest?
yeah. So this is an important one. And what I think it was is probably two things. One is I was raised in a family where and this is not even overt, so hopefully if my parents hear it, they won't be surprised because it's not like they told us to do this, but we were raised with a sense of responsibility in the sense that as an individual and especially as an adult, you look after yourself. You take care of business, maybe is an informal way to put it. You're a competent adult, you know?
Mm.
And so when I started my career and I started working, I very much thought of myself as this very competent, put together sort of person. And this happened despite warnings from my mother. She always said to us, do not become so deeply tied to your career that it is all you have. She's been saying this since we were, by the way, teenagers. And when I started my career, I thought I had learned that lesson. No, I thought it was in my head. But unfortunately, when I started working, it became a huge part of my, you know, of my
Your
self-identity, you know.
identity.
I have a job. I got this job because I'm smart and, you know,
I'm earning, I can
I've
take care of
progressed because
myself.
I make money, I can take care of myself. That was a core part of my identity. So what looked like failure to me brought a lot of shame, and that
Shame.
definitely prevented me from talking about it honestly. The
Mm.
second part of it came to me in a conversation I had much later with my sister, where when she was trying to help me figure one or two things out. This is my older sister, Pearl. And I think it comes from one of Jordan Peterson's books. For those of you who know Jordan Peterson, he's put out some positive
I do.
works. I have my
Yeah.
issues with him, but this particular book talks about the five areas of life. And I don't know if I'll get all of them, but those like family, friendship, work, creativity, and maybe health, right?
Mm.
And so his theory or thesis is that you have to kind of keep on top of these five things. And if all of them are in balance, you'll probably have, let's say, good mental health, or you'll be content, let's say. And when I looked at the five areas of my life, I felt ashamed because I was like, which area of my life is going well right now, right? In terms of health, I can't remember. At that point, I hadn't been working out in any serious way. I didn't have any deliberate or intentional health habits, whether it was
Mm.
dietary or whether it was exercise, right? So
Fitness.
health, I wasn't doing well. Work, I was clearly not doing well. Family, at that point, I had isolated myself from everyone, including my family, who I know deeply loved me, deeply cared. If they had known, they would have, you know, moved
Done
mountains to
everything for
help
you.
me. So my family relationships were not working. And, you know, an element of that is obviously the romantic. So I did not have a partner or a family of my own. So I'm like, okay, great, that's not working either. If it came to the creative or, you know, the personal develop, personal project,
Or
something that
meaning.
yeah, something that you're
Yeah,
passionate
meaning.
about, that wasn't working either. And then I think maybe mix them up slightly, but definitely God was part of it, you know, so the spiritual
Mm.
angle,
Yeah.
that was definitely not working, right? So it's almost like I looked at my life and I was like, babe,
Everything is
you have got to pick a struggle, you
struggle.
know? So that was also a source of shame for sure.
Shame. And there was, okay, you already talked about the fact that your friendships were not working. Basically,
Yeah,
no relationship,
yeah,
in a sense, you didn't have a safe space where you could just talk about these things, where you could
yeah,
talk to someone.
yeah,
Wow, wow, wow,
yeah,
wow, wow, wow.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
can see, I know there are so many people who will relate with this conversation because of the shame and the stigma that comes when you feel like you're failing at
Mm.
life. And sometimes even you imagine that everyone on the out, yes, there are situations where everyone on the outside is like proper shaming you of like, guy, get yourself together, get your life together. But for the most part, it's the internal, disgust we'll have with ourselves when we feel like
Yes.
we are
Yeah.
failing. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's way worse than
Yes.
than the outside voices,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? Yeah.
100%.
It's way worse
100%.
when we do it to ourselves. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Okay. So we've talked about shame. We've talked
Yeah.
about you isolating yourself from everyone. Now you've moved back to your own apartment in London. You've left your cousin because you'd rather pretend in peace. Yeah.
Asking me difficult questions.
I know because you don't have the answers at that point.
I
So
don't have
let's
the
just
answers.
be in your cocoon by yourself. No one is asking you
Mm,
anything. Yeah. Okay.
mm.
So what happens? At what point?
Yeah, so a couple of things happen, and obviously, as I said, the this is fuzzy, right? Because and we'll talk about actually this next part in detail. I want to talk about the depression that
Mm,
followed the burnout,
oh,
but we'll get
okay.
into that. But what happened next, which is slightly fuzzy, I remember my friend Philippa turning up at my house one day. She hadn't called, which she usually did, but I
Did
think she had kind of figured out that Sonia is not okay. So she just
she
turned
just
up
showed up
and
wherever you are?
knocked knocked at my door and knocked at my door. I actually need to have this conversation so that she can remind me exactly what happened. But I remember refusing to open the door for quite a long time, but she refused to leave. And eventually I said, you know what, this is actually not on because already traveling around London can be such a pain, And so for someone to have traveled all the way from, a whole other place to now come and check on me, I was like, I can't leave her out there. And so I think I eventually reluctantly let her in. Uh, And I think we had a conversation in which I do not believe that I opened up to her in any real way, even in that conversation, but I'm sure she could tell that I was not okay, but tried
Mm,
to play it off as normal. So that happened. And then a little while later, another friend of mine, Bridget, I think also tried to reach me and couldn't get in touch with me and was really worried. So she called another cousin of mine called Brenda. And Brenda turned up at my house and knocked at the door and said, please, you let me in. Or I think she threatened to call like my parents or the
mm.
authorities or whatever it is. So I let her in. And shout out to you, Brenda, because this was not quite yet at the point where I started really getting help. But for me, it was such
Pivotal
an
moment.
it was such a pivotal moment. So Brenda comes in, and I don't know if Brenda has dealt with a lot of people that are struggling, but what she did is she sat down with my friend Bridget, and I think we had tea or we had some drinks that I served them, and she didn't directly confront me. She just sat
Mm,
down with me and began to talk. And she began to tell me like a lot of stories of, from her personal life, but that were, I think, meant to sort of encourage me or to tell me that you're going to be okay.
okay.
And the reason it's so pivotal is that Brenda is so funny because I was laughing like the
Throughout the
world was going
conversation.
to throughout I laughed so hard, like I was crying, right? And I think this went on
Wow.
for a couple of hours. And I think what that did is that maybe it reconnected me a little bit with, life
Mm,
and what was happening.
mm.
And so that was a pivotal thing that happened that I remember. But I think for me, the turning point was it. It's so interesting because obviously this whole time I had been crying out to God because I'm a Christian. And I had been saying all these prayers where I would literally be crying tears and saying, God,
Mm,
I need you to help me figure this out. I need you to help
mm,
me figure this out. And on the spiritual side, up to that point, nothing had happened. I would pray and then it would be just another day. But then I remember this one day, like really praying. I think I was probably even on the floor and I was like, God, I don't know what is wrong. I don't know why I can't get out of bed. I don't know why I don't have energy to do anything. I don't know why I'm isolating myself. I need like help
help
me.
me.
Please, as my father,
Father.
help me.
Mm,
And
mm,
then around that time, my friend Bridget also sent me the contact for a therapist that she had been working with. And she said, look, reach out to this lady. Yeah, see if she can help you. And so I did that. I texted her. She lived in Kenya at that time, but we could talk on WhatsApp. So I messaged her. I said, look, I need help. And so we set up a couple of sessions. And one of the early things that really helped me start to heal or reconnect is she kept it very simple. She wasn't like a fancy lady with a fancy degree using big words. She was just a very relatable African woman. So she began to tell me about affirmations. And she said, Sonia, you have this very negative voice in your head that is telling you absolute lies, and you have to address that. You have to address that. So I started doing affirmations, and the way it happened is I had a terrace at the top of my building. So I would go up there, I would do some exercise, and then I would begin to say these affirmations. And at that time, these affirmations were things like, I am loved, because at that point, I was really trying to reconnect with my Father in heaven. So I was saying, I am loved, I am cherished, I am statements. And I don't know the science or the psychology behind them. What I do understand is that they're meant to rewire that voice. And for me, that worked. It worked really effectively. And I always say this to people that are struggling with this particular thing, that internal voice has to change first before you can really see a lot of progress. So I started doing the affirmations, and then I began to walk. There was a really, really beautiful park not too far from where I live, Greenwich Park. So I started walking 2 hours a day. And that was huge. That was huge. Just getting a bit of that little English sunshine in the summer or the spring months. But I was even walking when it was cold. And that should kind of tell you the period of time that this stretched. This was not a quick fix. This was not a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It took a lot of time, right? So people are probably wondering, okay, so have I said that I had quit my job by this time?
No, we just know that you went back, but then
Okay.
realized that you were still
Yeah,
exhausted
yeah,
and
and
then
and so I got additional time off,
time
right?
off.
So
Okay.
basically, I must have been officially off of work for maybe 6 months, roughly. And then, as I was beginning to find my legs, or let's say start the healing process, I think it became crystal clear to me that I would not be going back to my job. So I formally reached out and had those very, very difficult conversations. I do not say this lightly because, as I've already hinted, for me, the whole career thing was a huge part of my personal identity. I had never quit a job before. I mean, I had resigned, but I had always resigned. I had resigned once before, but that resignation was to move on to
To
bigger
another
and
better
better. So this is the first time that I was quitting because,
you
things were
can't
not
perform.
okay. And I did not have a plan B either. I did not have
That
a
must have
plan
been
B. So
very
that was
scary.
very, very scary. But I was honest with myself at that point to say, I'm clearly not going to be able to go back. I'm going to figure something else out. In any case, at the back of my mind, I knew that I was going back home, or at least that was the short to medium term plan. I needed to go back home, and we'll maybe talk about that stage of things and why that was important. But yeah, so that's I guess where we are in the story.
So you've started walking, reached out to a therapist. She's given you some work to do, I bet. The
Yeah,
affirmations is part of that.
yeah.
What else were you doing as part of your healing journey? Praying, of course, you
I
talked
was
about.
praying.
Yes.
Yes, I obviously improved my diet, began to eat
Mm,
healthy. That was also
mm,
really important. It was important for me to begin to feel good in my body. So that is
mm,
a huge part of what the exercise and the dieting was. Another really, really critical thing is that I needed a creative outlet. So
mm.
I began to write a lot. And then I started a podcast, which
Yes, I remember.
hopefully
I
you've
sent me your link and
Yes.
it was so nice because at that time I was living abroad as well. It was
Mm.
always nice to listen to someone someone who you can really relate with, familiar voice. It was really nice. I really loved your podcast.
Yeah, so I started the podcast, and that was so good for me. And the way I
Mm,
started it, I wasn't even sure when I did whether I would publish it, right? I just thought I
mm,
just need a creative outlet. So I would literally get up. Sometimes I would still be in bed, but I'd have like a thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'd begin recording it on my phone. And the thing that I particularly enjoyed about the podcasting journey for me personally was that in a way, it felt like I was finding my voice again, this voice that
mm,
had been muted for many years, at least a number of years at this point, partly because of living in a predominantly white society where my community of like-minded people from similar background is so small. There's a way in which you're always like shape-shifting, right? Shape-shifting so
Yes.
that you can
You're the
fit in
one
and
who has to assimilate. You're the one who has
yes,
to do all the work to be like them. And
exactly.
in many ways, we are always all looking for a place to belong. Belonging is
Mhm.
such a big, huge part of the human experience.
It
And we'll
is.
do incredible and unspeakable things just to belong. And it's sneaky, like you just
Mhm.
said, how your voice, without you realizing, is being muted. And it's so sad anyway, but go
Yeah.
on.
So when I was recording the podcast, I was accessing parts of me that had not had breath or light for such a long time.
Yeah.
My natural curiosity, my love for history, my love for languages, all of that began to like come alive again. And one of the really great things that would happen when I was walking is that a lot of these ideas would like, percolate and then, all these connections would form. And it felt like for the first time in a long time, I was accessing I hesitate to say like the real me because, even that idea is a bit nebulous. Like, who is the real you? A lot of times we're just like the product of all our experiences. But that is to say that up to that point, I had felt so disconnected from who I was authentically. Like, if you'd asked me, Sonia, who are you?
Who are
Maybe
you?
I would have been able to give you a fair, somewhat articulate answer. I don't know if it would have resonated from my spirit or,
Mm.
the core part of me. And as I was doing this podcasting, I was doing all this exploration and all this discovery about who I am, what I believe, what is important to me, right? So that also really, really helped. And I would encourage anyone that is trying to figure out a way out of this kind of darkness, if I can call it that, you have to find a creative outlet. And that can sound confusing because you're like, I mean,
Creative.
I feel like we were allowed to think of creativity up to a certain point in our
Certain
lives,
point. Yeah,
probably
yeah, yeah.
maybe childhood or maybe teenagehood if you were lucky. And then once you became an adult, it's like, no, my friend, now it's
It
serious
gets
business.
serious.
Get serious. And so the thing that I will say about that is that you'll probably have to do a lot of exploration. And I'll talk about this more in, I guess, the next stage. But the point is that I had to like explore. I had to play around with things. I had to play around with ideas until I found something that felt like it came naturally, right?
Naturally,
And that I
yeah.
seemed to naturally be good at. So yeah.
Nice. So the podcast was birthed out of
Yes,
a place of healing.
it did.
That's so beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I love the fact that some of the things that you've shared that worked for you on your journey of healing are so, they're not far off. They're
Mm.
just affirmations, exercising, just taking a walk.
Yeah.
Walks are so powerful. Prayer,
Mhm.
having that spiritual connection is always so important. Watching what we're eating, our diet. Like what are you
Those
putting
one
into your
important
body?
one. Those one important one we even talked about.
Which
So medication.
Oh yeah, I'm coming there. It's
Okay, all
coming. Thank
right.
you for preempting it.
Sure.
Yes. So you were doing all these things. You reach out to the
Yes.
therapist, the medical aspect. So at which point did you get medical attention?
So before I guess the walks really began to let's say work,
Do their
because
work.
initially it's not like I woke up and I said walking and I was like, no.
Hallelujah.
I hated it. First of all, I think when I started walking, it was cold. Winters are so cold and gray and drab, and the last thing you want to do is be out walking. So before I really began to enjoy the experience of walking. One of the things that my therapist pointed out was that obviously I had this persistent low mood. In other words, it felt like I was under this gray cloud and it seemed never ending. I couldn't access positive feelings of joy, of excitement, of looking forward to the future. Right. And I knew that was not normal because I hadn't always been like that. But I was now in this place where it just felt like I was, the future stretched out endlessly and there was nothing to be sort of excited about. Um, that I could see. But the other thing that I should mention, maybe I hadn't mentioned it up to this point because maybe it was somewhat less impactful, but maybe it will help someone. Obviously, when I took sick time off, I was also seeing a therapist in the
Therapist
official medical system, right?
system.
So I went to see a doctor and I was actually formally diagnosed with depression. I didn't act on it immediately because of probably cultural conditioning around, this word that is so dark and serious and etc. And I didn't want to take medication because I was also very skeptical about medication anyway. So when I realized that I was beginning to do things that should help my mood, but were not, let's say, working as quickly as I wanted them to work, I said, let me try. Let me try taking medication. Maybe this will help. And so I did. I think I ended up taking medication. They call them SSRIs. They are commonly prescribed for people that are clinically depressed. I think I probably took them for maybe 3 months. And what I will say is that they might have lifted the darkness, but for me, they left me feeling very numb. And so I didn't take them for a long time. But I really want to emphasize that, maybe for your particular circumstances, it can be helpful. Maybe it will take you out of a crisis situation. So I really encourage people not to dismiss it and to actually listen to your doctors. But also, sometimes you have to make the assessment for yourself. The doctor prescribed me medication, but once these other things started working better for my mood, because eventually I realized that when I go and I take a 2-hour walk and I come home and I make a nice meal and then I write for a few hours, for me that was doing much more for lifting my mood and keeping it stable than medication. So exercise wisdom. Do not dismiss expert help.
The medical
Yeah.
aspect to clinical depression or clinical mental health,
Yeah.
diagnosis.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I like what you've said that, exercise wisdom, don't dismiss it, get the help. I
Yeah.
would also say that, they played their part. Those 3 months of lifting you out of the very dark gray cloud. As you were
Yeah.
speaking, it just reminded me Europe has that gray thing. And
Yes.
every time when I lived there, the days when the sun came out, I had to be outside. Like there was no way I would find a reason to go out. And then I always realized what I took for granted when you live in back home Uganda, the sun always comes out. You don't even think about it.
You don't even think about it.
And you don't even think about it, it's there. But I think research shows that vitamin D plays such a big, big role in our mood, in just our mental well being. And so I remember reading something about that when I lived in Europe that,
Yeah.
your vitamin D levels need to
Yeah.
be taken care of because you're not getting as much sun as you need to get. And so it's so easy to get such challenges in such an area. This is
Yeah.
but,
True.
and I tie that back in with what you said of how when you went outside for 2 hours, it lifted your mood. You got a certain energy that gave you, motivation to go back home, do what you needed to do, rather than staying locked up indoors all the time. So I think, yeah, we can't take anything for granted. We shouldn't. We
No.
shouldn't.
Yeah.
We should not take anything for granted. So now you are feeling better, you're podcasting, you're exercising, you're being disciplined, I would say.
Yeah.
You're taking intentional care of yourself, you're eating
Yes.
right. So when did you head back home? What you now decided
Yeah.
the
So
job?
I've quit the job. The good
Yeah,
thing is
you
that
went back
I've
home.
always been very, very militant about like financial discipline and saving. So fortunately, I did not have like intense financial pressure to make rash decisions. I've always wondered whether that was a positive or a negative, because what ended up happening is I didn't like basically just quit London and head back home. But when I reflect on it, I think that was a good thing, right? Because what it did is that it gave me a little bit of time to obviously begin my healing process, but also to reframe some things that had happened that, had been negative, and then almost like have a positive experience in this place that I had called home, for 5 years and counting. If I felt like if I had left quickly, it almost would have, I don't know, I feel like I would have missed out on something. And I say that because I ended up staying for, I think, another year after I began, the
Mm.
healing process. And for me, that was the best year that I had in London. Yeah, because I actually, by the time I left, I loved the city. I was ready to
Mm.
leave. I was ready to go home. My time was up. But I can honestly say that my overall experience from living in that city, I left when it was positive. And for me, I think that was important. I think it was important because I had spent so much time, I had, expended so much energy. And sometimes maybe to leave on a negative note can maybe cause you to take longer to maybe resolve
Mm.
things. Anyway, the point is that I had time in which to do all the things that you've described, reconnect with my family and my friends who live over there. Again, this is a symptom that we didn't really talk about because I keep saying I can't quite remember. I can't remember the details, etc. It's because when you're deeply depressed, it actually affects your memory. So
Yeah,
yeah, there are things
something
that I remember really
blacked out or
clearly.
blocked out.
Yeah. And then there are things that are just a blur, right?
Yeah.
So what I can tell you is that I explored the city. For the first time, I was not living in this very busy metropolitan city, and all I'm doing is getting up and going to work
Going to.
and
Mm.
spending all these hours on the tube or all these hours stuck behind a screen. Or if at best maybe I'm traveling out of town and then I get to enjoy it a bit more. For that year, I was actually living in the city
Mm.
and getting a chance to explore it and really enjoy it. But
Very true.
obviously, I'm like, I am heading home. My time here
Mm.
is up. And
Yeah.
so eventually I moved back home, and that was such a huge blessing. I always like to give context because, again, our circumstances are different. I was very privileged that I could simply move back into my parents' house and basically have my mother look after me. And I say that because I also want to address another area in which people are so often shamed, especially adults and especially millennials, because we are living a slightly different life from, previous generations. And one important way in which this is happening is sometimes we're staying with our parents for a lot longer than we typically do, whether it's because of financial circumstances or maybe it's because of your personal circumstances where, let's say, you're not married, right? So
Mm.
by the time I moved back home, I'm still a single girl, but I've been independent for a very long time. But it seemed obvious to me that when I went back home, of course I would live with my parents. Why
Someone from
wouldn't
the
I?
parents.
I
Yeah.
love them very much.
Mm.
And it
It's
was in
home.
all ways easier. It is my home. Thank you. So I moved back home, and I think pretty soon after, it was around December time. So we went to Tungamo, which is where our family home is. And it was just me and my mom and my dad. And, we spent about 2 months just.
Chilling.
And again, even though I was well into my healing, for me, this was something that healed something very specific. When we talk about like the five elements of life, the family part of it, just spending this time with my parents, just talking or just even in each other's presence. I had missed that so much. Inevitably, as our parents get older, we begin to recognize that we won't have them forever. Right.
Forever.
So
Yeah.
for me, having the privilege of spending this extended period of time with them was so important. And it also goes back into like rebuilding your self-identity, away
Mm.
from this career babe. But no,
Work.
there are all these other elements in my life that are so important to me. And having the time to spend, which I hadn't had for 10 years because I was so busy with my job. For a period of that time, I lived at home, but my parents would see me at like 10 o'clock in the evening, right? And now I'm
Mm.
just spending all these long, relaxed
Days.
days with them. That was amazing. And so now I'm really finding my feet, and I'm having to think about, okay, this is all well and good, but at the end of the day, bills have to be paid. A
Paid.
girl is an adult, so I need to think about, how I will earn money. And this is a really fun thing that I like to describe. And it goes back to how, unfortunately, many of us never get the chance to explore, right? You go
Mm.
to primary school, you go to high school, you go to secondary, you choose a career, and you get going. right? And then many of us maybe end up in careers that don't really suit us or don't bring us any joy or any meaning or
Joy.
anything like that. So for me, the next few months was a time to explore. And when I tell you that I explored some very unusual things, shall we say, I remember, I think I wrote a proposal to, one of the business leader about starting an ayahuasca retreat. I made a foray into property development with a
Development.
certain Nigerian, businessman. Some very unusual moves, shall we say. I regret none of it. I regret none
That's
of it.
good.
For me, it was a time of exploration. And obviously, I have all this experience and skill in consulting, specifically in IT risk. So that was always sort of my safe sort of fallback position. And so I knew that maybe I didn't want to go back into the corporate world, but I had the skills that I could sell very easily. So I began, crafting this idea of having like a boutique consultancy, a one-man shop, because at that point I didn't want to really connect myself too deeply back into that world. So I said, I can do this as an individual. And so I began to build out the idea around that. And just as it was sort of gaining traction, is when I had this opportunity to apply to Thunderbird, which is a school that I'm at. It aligned very well because to be a consultant, especially an independent consultant, you need a master's degree, which
Yeah.
I'd been planning to get for such a long time, but I just hadn't had the time. Where was I going to find that
Mm.
time,
Mm.
in my very busy schedule to do a master's degree? But now I had the opportunity to do it. And so I applied to it along with a very generous fellowship, which I got, and then that's how I arrived in Arizona in August of 2024. Yeah,
Wow. I didn't want to interrupt you, so I'll piggyback a bit to what you
sure.
said about, getting back home, reconnecting with your parents, spending that time. As you were speaking, I just thought about the power of relationship in our well-being,
Hmm.
and that when we connect, I love, this is a saying that, gets thrown out a lot. Ubuntu, we am
Mm.
because we are.
Hmm.
That
You,
sense
oh,
of
100%.
connection is
Yeah.
so, so important for our well being. And I think after living in the West, which is predominantly individualistic, and somehow we get sucked into believing that, you can do life on your own terms, you can do life by
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And I think your story is such a reminder that we need each other. We need to
We
be
do.
connected relationally
We do.
and not as a means to an end, but for us to be. We need to be connected. And the way the world is set up, the West has all the power. It's making all the decisions. All the things are coming from there. We in the global South somehow get consumed, and we believe the lie that, I can do it on my own. I can, I'm just going to work on my career. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to set myself up. But I think your story for me has highlighted and reminded me the power of not ever believing that lie, that we
No,
need relationships,
we do.
we need to maintain and really fight to stay connected with
Yes.
the people in our lives, because
100%.
I'm just hearing your story, your friends coming, knocking on the
Hmm.
door, 2 hours of you laughing, and how
Hmm.
that was a pivotal moment for you, connecting with a therapist in Kenya,
Hmm.
connecting with a medical
Hmm.
therapist. Like your healing journey, I just see points of relational connection that are so important,
So
our
important.
mental well-being, for our overall well-being.
Yes.
It's so important to stay connected. And I think the whole work hard, kill yourself in the workplace. Don't lose that balance of staying connected with the people that really matter to us is something that we have to be very careful about. And
Very, very careful.
that time of healing for you, that those 2 months in Tungamo with your parents, I think they cannot be understated because your identity was in shambles. Who are you beside this career woman? Who are you? And that's another important thing that has come out for me in
Yeah.
this conversation is who are you, your identity outside
Yeah.
of your work, outside of this work thing. Who are
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
outside of that?
For
What
you.
makes you who you are? Like, who are you? That identity crisis that so many people face all the time.
And let me say
And
just one more thing on that, sorry, because this is also very important and it goes exactly to that question. I haven't talked about my siblings because obviously I ended up spending a lot of time with them as well, right? My sister Nina was, literally across the hall from me. I cannot tell you how much how healing it was for me, the long nights that we would have, because we would just sit up and just talk about
talk.
anything and everything, right? My sister Pearl would come home sometimes with her kids, sometimes without, but there are times when she would just lie on my bed and we would just talk for hours. And my brother as well is, I don't like talking about my brother because people are like, is your brother an angel? Or what is the situation? Anyway,
He's just a good
my brother
man.
also used to come home quite a lot to, check on my
Mm,
parents and we would end up talking for hours. But a really important part of this whole who are you self-identity thing is my nephews and nieces
mm,
because I spent a lot of time with them. My second to youngest niece was still very young, so sometimes her parents would ask me to like babysit, or
mm.
sometimes all the kids would come home and I'd look after them for days. And for me, I hadn't realized how important it was for me to have an outlet for my
Mm.
mothering
Motherly
instinct or for
instinct,
my
yeah.
instinct to nurture or to look after small children. Olivia, that is a huge part of asking this who are you
You.
question. It gave me so much joy to be an active and present
Present.
aunt, sister, daughter, friend. We also haven't talked about my friendships. I'll say very briefly that I became very, very intentional about my
Friend,
friendships. Yeah,
yeah.
and that was also a huge part of
Part of
it.
the healing, yeah. I don't know how long this conversation has
I
gone
know it's
for.
gone on for so long. I'm so
That's
sorry.
okay. That's okay. That's okay. My next question to you as we come to the tail end of this, we may have to have a part two, who knows?
I think so.
What does freedom balance look for you in your context? Look like for you in your context today, even as you are doing your masters?
Yeah,
What does freedom and balance in in reflection of what you've been through?
yeah,
What does looking after your mental health, even as you work, even as you do this
yeah,
consulting
yeah.
solo?
I'll start with balance because that one is easier. One of the reasons that I came to Arizona specifically is because this is where my best friend lives, my
Mm,
best friend and her family. So she's married, she's got two kids, her sister lives here as well. And to your point, once you recognize how important that human connection, that human relationships are, I was not going to make the same mistake twice, and move to some
remote.
strange land where I wouldn't have any kind of support. I cannot overemphasize what a huge difference that has made in terms
Mm,
of moving to a new place.
mm,
So what my experience was in my early days in London versus what my experience has been here so far. It has been so much easier. It has been so
mm.
much lighter. And all of that is because of, the family
Relationship.
effectively that I have here. They have
Mm,
supported me. They've helped in overt and just subconscious ways. Just the fact that
mm,
if anything happens, I know that there are two, three people who I can call very quickly. I've also got a friend, David, and his wife, and they've just had a
mm,
baby. That is my community here in
mm,
in Arizona, and they're a real community. The people that I've
mm,
known for a long time, some of my oldest friends. So they provide that sort of foundation which supports me and keeps reminding me of how important it is to keep these things in balance. I've also
mm.
been a lot more deliberate about staying connected to my family back home. So just as simply having that frequent communication with them, whether by call or by WhatsApp or whatever it is. I think maybe those are the foundational things. And then when it comes to, let's say, school, because obviously I spend a lot of time at school, I also work part-time. It's leading with my values, which for most of my career, I had never defined. I had never even thought about, what are my values? And, without going into a lot of detail, it's things like curiosity. Interestingly enough, freedom is also an important one. I realized that actually for
Mm,
me, freedom is important, and it's probably why I've been able to like leave home often and explore many different things. It's because I think that is a core part of my identity, the freedom to explore things, which is driven by my natural curiosity. So leading with my, and then there's also, kindness, fairness. I have a very maybe overdeveloped sense of justice. I'd no longer, because
I
I've
think that's why
defined,
we're friends.
yeah. So I've defined these things now for me so I can articulate them and then finding the courage to lead with them in my
Mm.
interactions, whether it is at school, whether it is at work. That helps me to, remain in balance and to remember what my priorities are and how to
Mm.
arrange them.
Wow. I
Yeah.
love the curiosity part.
Yeah.
I love, love, love it. I'm always telling my daughter when I drop them to school, my elder one, I always tell her, stay curious. As I say it, it will become just a part of who she remains to stay
Yeah.
curious. Because there's so
Curious.
many things that will dim that natural curiosity we are all born with. And then the freedom. I like the freedom
To be,
to
to be.
be unapologetically who you are, especially in contexts where it's easier not to be. It's easier to dim yourself just to fit.
Yes.
I think that's also something that's very, very important to me, I've found. And
Yeah.
I can't live in spaces where I don't have that. When I feel like that permission is being squeezed away from me, I quickly know not survive in that.
And you've always been like that, by the way.
Have
I just
I?
remember
Like,
during high school. Yeah, you
I
always had to think
just
of
need,
no.
I just need
Actually,
the
no.
freedom. I need the freedom to
Yeah.
be
Mm,
unapologetically me because,
yeah.
and I think that we need more people who are unapologetically them,
Mm,
and not in a negative, narcissistic, um, dangerous way, but just because there's so many spaces where we are caused to dim who we are. And
yeah.
that has an impact on our well being.
Being. It
And the
does.
permission to just be gives other people permission to
To
be.
also be. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so, so important to our well being. Sonia, this has been so powerful. You have shared so beautifully. Thank you so much for being vulnerable, for opening up, for sharing your story. I know it's going to bless so many people. So, as we conclude, what would you say to someone who is going through burnout right now and is lost?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
The first thing that I would say is that please take it from someone who genuinely thought that it would never end, who genuinely thought that there was no hope for healing, for even just envisioning the future, that it will not last forever. I promise you, it doesn't matter if it has been a year or 2 years or 5 years, even longer. As long as there is life, there is hope. Please believe me when I say that a day will come when you will get the help. Hopefully, you will have the courage to reach out for it, but in my case, I didn't. People had to reach out to me. Yeah. But a day will come when things will turn for the better. So please be encouraged. Healing is not linear. There were sort of many stops and starts along the way, but eventually something stuck. And ironically, I will try and end with this. That experience is probably one of the best things to have happened to me, which sounds strange. But the truth is that the person that I was before was someone who lacked clarity on so many things and didn't really have a self-identity. And the person that came out of that process is a much, much better person and someone that I am so proud of. And, I have had help all along the way, but I now look on all of that positively. So I hope that encourages someone.
Amen. That's like a prayer. We receive it. For me, what
Mhm.
I'll say is that ditch the shame. If you're out there, you're struggling, there is something Sonia has said that you really resonate with, just reach out for help. And maybe for me, this is also something I'll say that we need to be intentional in our friendships, check on our friends, check on those strong friends. Sonia was a strong
Yes.
friend. I couldn't imagine that this could happen to her, but
Yeah.
we need to be intentional to check on our friends, like Brenda, your friends who came,
Yeah.
who knocked on
Yeah.
that door. If your friend is struggling, don't just
Mm.
say, I'm not prying. No, pry. Some
Right.
moments in our friendships require
Yeah.
us to pry,
Oh,
require us to
100%.
push the door, to say
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
something is not right, and to encourage people to seek medical attention. You know, the stigma
Mhm.
is not helping. So if you are really not well, go see a doctor, go see a therapist. Try everything. Your life matters. You are worthy of a healthy mental existence, you know. And I hope that this conversation has done what it's supposed to do. Break the stigma and encourage us all to take care of our mental health. Thank you so much, Sonia,
Thank you for
for
having
this time on the Relate Pod. Such a beautiful, honest conversation, so many nuggets, so much wisdom. I am truly, truly blessed to have a front row seat in your life and to see the amazing things you are doing. I love, love your Instagram posts. Oh, by the way, if you're on Instagram, you need to be following a Ugandan babe. She's amazing, calling out people out
Please make
there.
sure you come with a sense of humor, though. So,
Yeah, I love what you're doing. I find that we are so connected in many ways, the things that matter.
absolutely.
And keep doing what you're doing, by the way.
And
You're
likewise.
sharing.
And thank you for being such a constant in my life. I have called you at some of the most random points, but thank you for
I
being there.
know, and I'll
Yeah.
always be, you know.
Yeah.
I think that God is very intentional about the people He places in our lives. I
Mm.
know that people are not in our lives randomly. They are there for a purpose, even when we can't see it. I have this picture of us in S1 in our red skirts. If you had shown us this moment then, we couldn't even fathom it. But
No.
God saw this moment and
Yeah.
so many of the other moments we've shared. So thank you and hope to have you again on the Relate
Yes.
Pod.
I hope we have
Yes.
another conversation. Maybe I'll have you on a Ugandan babe
Think you need
soon.
to resurrect a
I
Ugandan babe.
do. That's the plan.
When
That's
you
the
finish the
plan.
masters, I know it's very busy right now for you,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day and
Likewise.
see you
My
soon.
soon, my love to the family. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but
Enjoy.
do
Yeah.
bye.